Welcome back to One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. We're pleased to have a special guest on the show today. It's Sal Licata. You hear him on WFAN, you see him on SNY, and he's recently joined the podcast team at the New York Post, talking New York Knicks. Sal, appreciate a few minutes here. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me, Emmanuel. I appreciate it. And Jimmy, you guys, it's fun to have some time here to talk some New York sports. Looking forward to it.
So, of course, on the forefront of a lot of New York sports fans' minds lately is the Jets situation. They potentially miss out on the opportunity to draft Trevor Lawrence. And last night, you see Justin Fields absolutely light it up in a showdown with that same quarterback prospect. So, Sal, you put the GM cap on right now. You're Joe Douglas. Where are you with the whole stay the course of Sam Darnold or draft Justin Fields situation?
Yeah, it's a difficult decision to make, and a lot more goes into it than just saying, "Oh, look at Justin Fields and what he did against Clemson, and who knows what he's going to do in the national championship game." That could either further rise his stock or obviously maybe bring it back a little bit. I think Joe Douglas is in a position of power, and it was never to me about just having the number one pick and getting Trevor Lawrence. It's not, oh, if they don't get Trevor Lawrence, it's a disaster. What are the Jets going to do? No, that's nonsense to me. They still have 2 first-round picks. They have a boatload of picks. Joe Douglas is a guy who the Jet fans have no choice but to trust, but I actually do trust that he's going to pick the right players. For me, it's more important who the head coach is. I don't know where he's going to go or who he's going to look at to bring in a head coach, but I think that's more important. If you're focusing just on that second pick, I think you can build a team. Let's say they take the lineman from Oregon and you pair him Sewell, you pair him with Becton, and now you're starting to build one of the better offensive lines in the NFL. You've seen what the Colts can do with that, even without a quarterback. You can win without having a great quarterback. So can Sam Darnold be a winning quarterback at the NFL level? I would like to see what coach they bring in and what pieces they put around him. I think that's still yet to be determined. If he believes that Justin Fields or any other quarterback, though, is a can't miss in his mind, and this is a guy we have to build our franchise around, then you take the quarterback. If you don't, if you have any doubts whatsoever about Fields or anybody else, then you either take the best player available or you trade down, because now that number 2 pick, thanks to Fields having a big game against Clemson, now that number 2 pick is going to have much more value, I would think, from other teams who desperately need a quarterback.
Sal, let's stay on the Jets here. And you talked about the head coach, which is, I think, a really good point. And everybody basically knows that on Sunday night or Monday morning, Adam Gase is going to be gone. But without the number 1 pick and a number of high-profile coaching vacancies around the league, how concerned are you about the Jets maybe missing out on some of the high-end head coaching candidates and maybe not getting somebody as good just because they don't have the number 1 pick and it might not be as attractive of an opening?
Well, you'd have to tell me the guy. I mean, you're telling me Jacksonville is more of attractive of an opening than New York City? I have a hard time believing that, even with – you're right, Jimmy. Some people are going to say that, well, Trevor Lawrence is going there, therefore makes it more attractive, similar to what Arizona did with Kyler Murray and Cliff Kingsbury. And I didn't like that move by Arizona, and I'm still waiting for it to pay dividends exactly. It's not like Arizona's lighting the world on fire with their brilliant offense. So I don't know. I mean, it depends on the guy. Let's just say Urban Meyer, right? Who he's a name who's coming out there, and he's obviously one of the biggest names if he is available. Let's just say he's the guy, and both the Jets and the Jaguars want him. Is he going to look at Jacksonville as a premier destination to New York just because of Trevor Lawrence? Because that's the only reason you can possibly sell me that Jacksonville will be more enticing than New York. Assuming, usually the biggest deal with the head coach is taking these jobs is ownership. So assuming that each spot ownership in Jacksonville is very good with Khan, maybe they don't like what they hear from the Jets. Maybe they do. Maybe you hear from the Johnson ownership that you could do whatever you want. Joe Douglas is our guy. We're getting out of the way here, and this is his team. So that, to me, is the most important thing. But if you're comparing New York to really anywhere else, but more specifically Jacksonville, I would think New York wins every time. I know I'm biased. I'm from here. I'd rather win and be in New York than succeed anywhere else in the world. But that's just me. So I think it comes down to the 2 things. The biggest thing, the individual, the ownership situation, and then looking at where the team is at. But it's not like the Jets are in a bad spot. They have salary cap space. They have all these top picks. And they do technically have a quarterback in Sam Darnold, who a lot of people in the profession, whether it's college football or pros, still believe Sam Darnold could play.
Sal Licata, our guest here on One on One. Sal, so let's say the Jets decide against keeping Sam Darnold and they reset that quarterback clock once again. Justin Fields, of course, solidified himself as an option last night. Would you be wary of some of these quarterback handicappers now where Fields all of a sudden becomes the option where Lawrence was a week ago, and then now if he drops a dud against Alabama, all of a sudden Fields could be dropping into the afterthought category again? Where do you stand with the whole quarterback prospect scenario?
I think you just nailed it, Emmanuel. That's why I think it's laughable that everybody says, oh, Trevor Lawrence is a can't miss and you're going to change the franchise and this and that. Because you're right. We've been down this road before. Goff and Carson Wentz, right, where nobody at the time said that those two were going to go back-to-back 1 and 2 or that they were going to be that high. And then all of a sudden you get close to the draft and they sneak up to the top of the board. You had Baker Mayfield in that Sam Darnold draft going number 1, where that wasn't always going to be the case. People were talking about Rosen or Josh Allen and then Darnold himself. And then Baker Mayfield all of a sudden goes 1. So it changes like the wind. I don't think they know what they're talking about. So, yes, I would be wary. You can't just go based off of one game now. Wow, Justin Fields looked tremendous. Now, he did. He opened my eyes, but I'm not watching game film on Justin Fields every day of the week. I'm not doing that. I'm sorry. So I watch him in that big spotlight, and I'm thinking to myself, how could Trevor Lawrence be that much more highly touted than this kid who just made every throw possible? The deep throws, over the middle throws, makes big plays with his legs. A caller last night to my overnight show compared him to Russell Wilson. I thought it was an excellent comparison, specifically running the football. You know, Fields also taking the hit and being able to stay in the game after that, showing extreme toughness. So I watch that and I think to myself, I don't see the disparity that everybody's saying with Justin Lawrence compared to Fields. However, you don't want to react to just one game. And like you said, if he goes out there and lays an egg in the national championship game, are people then going to get off of the Justin Fields bandwagon? But no question he opened some eyes. But to answer the question, I would be wary of how these teams go about evaluating these quarterbacks. They don't always get it right. That's why it's not a given that just because you have the number 1 pick, all of a sudden your franchise is saved.
Being that, you know, you are wary about the quarterback situation in the draft, you know, beyond Trevor Lawrence, which seems to be changing all the time. Let's say, hypothetically, the Jets stick with Sam Darnold here. And, you know, he's had a year where he's been up and down this season, I think, to put it charitably. How much of this do you think is, you know, Sam Darnold really struggling and maybe he just doesn't have it, you know, to be an NFL quarterback? How much of it do you also think is maybe the coaching and the situation he's been put in? Like, do you think Sam Darnold could be a lot better next year in maybe a better environment with better coaching and maybe even with better weapons?
I do, but Sam Darnold has to take it. The one thing I'll say about Sam Darnold that I don't love about him, he has not proven to be an alpha male. He has zero confidence right now. Now, there are reasons for that. Maybe his personality is such where he's almost too nice. I don't want a guy who's too nice. Josh Allen, you look at him and people say his arrogance or his confidence, his cockiness. Well, look at the way he plays. You know what? Sometimes that translates to good play on the field. So I want to see more of an alpha male attitude from Sam Darnold, more nastiness, maybe be a little mean and cocky and arrogant. Now, to have that confidence, sometimes you have to have success. Sam Darnold has not been in a position to succeed. Therefore, whatever confidence he may have had going into the Jet situation has been taken away because of all that's gone on. A lot of it's on him because no matter what the circumstances are around you, you can't lose that confidence. He's also been hurt and gotten sick with the mono. He's been unlucky at times, but it also is the system around him. He has a head coach that is inept as far as how to build a football team. He's dealt with Todd Bowles for a year. Then he had Adam Gase. So, and he hasn't really had a legitimate roster around him. He's shown games. He's had flashes in certain games. The Cowboys game a year ago comes to mind where you watch him play and you're thinking, man, they have this guy. You know, this is not Christian Hackenberg or Bryce Petty. He can play. So it's got to be the right circumstance. But I do think he takes a little bit of a hit for not, you know, we can knock Baker Mayfield for some of his performance, and he's been up and down and inconsistent throughout his young NFL career so far. You don't doubt his unwavering confidence and his attitude and his leadership ability. With Sam Darnold, that, however, is not there. So that's where I would put a knock on him. I do think the right coach, the right system could still save him and have him win some games at the NFL level.
Sal, tomorrow afternoon, surprisingly, some playoff implications in town. You have the Giants and the Cowboys and a potential outside path for the Giants to sneak in as a division winner into the NFC playoff picture. If you're a Giants fan sitting down for that game tomorrow afternoon, what's the mindset for you? Are you actively rooting for that division crown, or hey, a lot of discussion has been had about the draft pick scenario? Do they go up? Do they go down? What does this mean for the future trajectory of the franchise in your mind?
Yeah, it's an interesting game as far as the future goes. I think this would stamp a solid year one in Joe Judge if they could get a win, regardless what happens with the Washington-Philadelphia game. So they have to look at it individually and say, we need to do what we can do, and that's go beat the Cowboys, get our 4th division win of the year, and finish a strong 6-10, considering where they started 1-7 or whatever it was. That would be, to me, a solid season, finishing 6-10, and also going into the year. What'd you expect from the Giants? Did you expect more than 6 wins? I don't think I did. The only concern I would have would be the development of Daniel Jones. Now, I look at him as a quarterback he's never going to be top 5 quarterback, but he's a quarterback who can win some games. And if they can run the football and build on the way that they've started to run the football this year and play defense the way that they've played defense this year, they're going to be a team to be reckoned with in the NFC. I don't see any reason why next year they can't be a team that legitimately contends for a playoff spot, or win a division at 10-6 as opposed to 6-10. So I think this is an important game for this year, just to stamp home what I thought was a solid year one as far as building the foundation with Joe Judge and then Daniel Jones to a lesser extent. Joe Judge showed me more than Daniel Jones that I think he needs to have a big year next year. If they win the game and don't make the playoffs, so what? That happens. There's nothing they can do about that. If they win and get in the playoffs, great. And then they give their fans a playoff game. And that's all you can ask for as a fan. I don't understand the fans' logic. And I haven't really heard it, that they want to root for the team to lose and not make the playoffs because they want a higher draft pick. Obviously, I heard it with the Jets all year long. I also don't agree with that philosophy. Rooting for your team to lose doesn't make any sense. That kind of goes against, it's a complete opposite of what being a fan is. If you're a fan of a team, you root for that team to win. End of story. I worry about I've never, as much as I would hate a team or be frustrated at a team in season, that a team that I love rooting for, I never root against them when it comes down to it. So I can't imagine any Giant fan not being so excited in what is an essential playoff game against the hated Dallas Cowboys tomorrow afternoon, how they can't get locked into that game, and not only for the moment of that game and what it means, beating the Cowboys, a team who was shown to improve here as the year has gone on. You beat a division rival, have a chance to win a division later on in the day, and you have some excitement with that Sunday Night Football game, but also about the future and knowing that in a big game, even with Daniel Jones being somewhat limited, dealing with the injuries, Joe Judge and his club showed up, beat a Cowboys team who you could argue is more talented, more explosive, and got themselves to 6-10 in year one, and what is a foundational year for Joe Judge and the Giants.
And Sal, speaking of the future of the Giants, one of the decisions they're going to have to make in the offseason is the future of Dave Gettleman and whether or not he stays in charge in that front office. There's no doubt this Giants team's playing better than it was last year. They're obviously a lot more competitive. But do you think Dave Gettleman, with what he has done in that front office, has done enough to justify giving him another year in charge of the personnel in the organization, basically?
Yeah, I do. Now, have I loved every draft pick that Dave Gettleman has made? No, I hated Saquon Barkley at number 2, especially at the time. I would never take a running back second overall. The only way you can maybe convince me is to say it's the final piece. A good team has a bad year because, let's say, the quarterback gets injured. Somehow they find themselves with a top 5 pick, and they take a running back because that was the final piece. That's the only way maybe you could sell it to me. Otherwise, it makes no sense whatsoever. So I hated that draft pick. Obviously, he's missed on others. He missed on hiring the head coach with Pat Shurmur. I thought his biggest failure was misreading the team that he inherited. So he made some mistakes, as all GMs do. Nobody's perfect. But he did hit on Daniel Jones. He did hit on Joe Judge. Those two, regardless of what Giants fans think, those two aren't going anywhere. So unless Dave Gettleman wants to walk away because of his age or because of his health, and I don't think that that's the case. I look at Dave Gettleman as a passionate guy who wants to see this thing through and at least be there to see the Giants achieve some of that success. Winning a division this year, yeah, it would be an accomplishment, but you know what I mean? It's not a real, at 6-10, you win a division, you fall into it. You want to win a division and have a consistent regular season and really feel like your team is headed in the right direction with consistent winning. If this goes right according to plan, starting with next year, the New York Giants, led by Joe Judge and Daniel Jones, should be consistent contenders for playoff spots. in the NFC. And I think that's what Dave Gettleman wants to see it through. Build that defense, build that ground game and offensive line inside, out, build inside the trenches, maybe find an explosive playmaker, which they can use. They traded Odell Beckham Jr., sure, and I think that was the right move, and I give Gettleman credit for that because it wasn't an easy move, but it was the right move. So he's had some good ones, and then they need some weapons, as we said. They obviously need some work, but I don't think based on the entire resume here, which isn't even that big, it's not a long resume. You got to be patient. I do think he deserves to stay because he now got the head coach right and found the quarterback when a lot of people wanted him to pick Haskins. That would have been a disaster. So he didn't, and he went with his gut and his guy, and I think he got it right.
Chatting with Sal Licata here on One. Sal, flipping it over to the baseball offseason, a very slow-moving one at that. Mets signed James McCann. Mets fans basically get all their wishes answered in 2020 despite a difficult year. Steve Cohen becomes the new owner of their baseball team. But admittedly, a slow-moving market. Trevor Bauer is still out there. George Springer is still out there. Talks about getting both. Maybe you get one or the other. As a Mets fan, what's your ultimatum for a successful offseason? And is it one or is it both?
I think it's probably George Springer, Emmanuel. For me, that's what I've been saying all along. Now, some of the numbers that have gone out there, Springer wants 150, and they didn't say the years, but maybe you're thinking 5 years minimum. But let's say 150 million, and the Mets said 120 million. That's pretty significant difference right there. I do think George Springer, though, is the key to the Mets offseason. It's tricky to say one guy is going to make the offseason a success or a complete bust because there are many ways to do it. Let's say they don't get George Springer. They can figure out, they could sign Ozuna, let's say, and put him in left field and figure out how they're going to go about it with center field. Maybe they could trade for Kiermaier from the Rays. There are other ways to do it to improve the ball club, and then they could go elsewhere and sign, let's say, LeMahieu, or make a trade for Arenado or Lindor. But the Met fan is so excited with Steve Cohen that I feel like they want Springer and Bauer and Lindor or Arenado and some bullpen help. I think they need bullpen help, which I think they'll get, whether it is Hendricks or Hand. I think they need that. I think they need another starter, not named Trevor Bauer. I would not go into the category that Bauer is going to be in as far as the finances go and spend 200 million or whatever it is, 30, 40 million a year on Trevor Bauer. I don't think they need that. You have one ace, you don't need two, but you could use an arm to lengthen out that starting rotation, which I think they'll get. I think they'll get a couple of bullpen arms. I think they'll get another arm to add to the depth of an already solid rotation. That's why I look at Springer as the guy. They don't have a center fielder. And realistically, where's the other good option? Brandon Nimmo is an okay player. He's not a real center fielder. Even Kiermaier, let's say they could get Kiermaier from the Rays. He's a great defensive center fielder. He's not the offensive player that George Springer is. He doesn't have that resume. So Springer, to me, is the perfect fit because he's a legit defensive center fielder. He's, from the Northeast in Connecticut. He's experienced in the postseason. He's had success. He's proven in the postseason. I think Springer would be the perfect fit. And I think the key to the offseason would be to sign him. And I do think they are going to get him. If they lose him, is it a complete failure? They'll make up for it, I think. But I think he's the key to having a very successful offseason.
Emmanuel asked about the Mets, so I'll flip it over to the Yankees here. And it's obviously a different conversation with the Yankees. They're just talking about really the main thing being bringing back DJ LeMahieu. So I'll ask kind of a similar question to what Emmanuel asked. What do you think the Yankees need to do this offseason, whether it's just bringing people back or maybe going out, getting some assets to make their fans feel good that they can maybe make up ground between them and the rest of the league? Obviously, they're close to winning a championship, but what do you think they need to do for their fans to feel really good about their title chances heading into 2021?
Yeah, Jimmy, I think it's about bringing back LeMahieu. Now, you talked about trying to improve. Before you can improve, you have to at least be the same, right? They can't improve their ball club if they lose DJ LeMahieu. You can maybe change the look of it. Let's say they lose LeMahieu and then they go out there and make a trade for Francisco Lindor and put him at short and then move Gleyber Torres to second base and they can fill out their infield like that. Wouldn't be a bad consolation prize, but the Yankees need DJ LeMahieu. That is, I mean, if they don't bring him back, it's a complete failure. He is so different from everybody else in their lineup. He is their MVP. He is their best hitter. He's an all-around great player, defensively, offensively. The Yankees need more of DJ LeMahieu. Now, those guys are hard to find, but at least they need players that are closer to LeMahieu as opposed to guys that are closer to Stanton and Judge and Voit and Sanchez, who are all or nothing hitters. They have too many of those guys. So bare minimum, and the Yankees aren't dealing with a lot of resources here, at least financially, where they don't want to go over the tax threshold. They already have mega contracts with Garrett Cole and Giancarlo Stanton. They're not going to overextend for LeMahieu as bad as they want him back. See, LeMahieu's in a weird spot because he wants to be with the Yankees, but he also wants what's best for him. And if the Dodgers are going to go out there and give him the best contract, the Dodgers at least can bring somewhat what the Yankees bring. They have that cachet. They're World Series champions. They're going to go out there and compete again for a World Series title. So that would be the team that would worry me if I'm the Yankees. But they have to bring LeMahieu back. Starts with that. And then what they need to do is get creative in dealing from the resources that they do have, which if you're not going to go out there and spend on players, there's another way to acquire players, and that's via trade. And they have prospects, so they're going to have to part with those prospects, whether that is Andujar, Florial, whoever, Clint Frazier potentially. And I know he's even more than prospects. Obviously, they have lower level prospects that aren't household names. The only guy I wouldn't be looking to give up is Davy Garcia. I think he's, a young arm that you want to keep a part of that rotation. But there are other guys. The Reds, Luis Castillo is a guy who I would target if I'm the Yankees. Go out there and see what the Reds want to be able to get him. Try to take advantage of some teams that are selling off some of these players and want prospects. The Yankees have that. That's something I'd be looking to do in addition to bringing DJ LeMahieu back.
Sal, you mentioned Garrett Cole, and I think it's interesting because when the Yankees signed Cole, it was almost seen as the cherry on top, the finishing touch on a championship roster. But if the season started tomorrow, I don't like doing that, but it's the nature of where we are in the offseason. Garrett Cole's your ace, and then you're dealing with Montgomery, Herman maybe. You're going to Davy Garcia, Michael King. Are you concerned at all about this Yankee rotation picture?
Yeah, a little bit, but I still don't think that that's their issue. Now that they have Garrett Cole, they have the hardest part to find, which is that legit ace, right? So you have that, and then you kind of piece everybody in behind it. Now, it's going to be a young rotation, Emmanuel. As you mentioned, a lot of the guys there. I like Garcia. I like Montgomery. I like Michael King. Herman, who knows what's going to happen when he comes back, but at least he's had success here. You have to figure out, what he's going to be when he comes back from dealing with all the issues that he's dealt with. They have some young arms. I would like to see them add one more veteran behind Garrett Cole. And, is that bringing back Tanaka? I don't know. I love Tanaka. I think it's kind of over, though, with the Yankees and him. He is what he is. He disappointed in the postseason with the start against Cleveland. So that would, not that one start alone would concern me, but just I feel like we've gotten to a point where, from the Yankees' perspective, Tanaka has been in decline kind of since they brought him up. Would Tanaka help other teams in Major League Baseball? Yeah, I think he could be an upgrade in a rotation if he chooses to play for another team, if not go back to Japan. But I do think the Yankees need a veteran, a solid guy behind Garrett Cole, and then have those young guys fill in. They don't need Trevor Bauer, but they could use a guy. And I even like the guy like Luis Castillo, as I mentioned, a guy who dominated with the Reds, a young pitcher, maybe not that veteran presence you're looking for. But I think the Yankees should take a flyer on one of the veteran arms that are out there, whether they can go trade for one or sign one. They probably need that in the rotation. I don't think that's their biggest issue. Their biggest issue is not carrying over what is a usually dominant regular season offense into the postseason. And that needs to be fixed by bringing in guys who put the ball in play.
He's Sal Licata, SNY, WFAN, brand new New York Post Knicks podcast. You can follow him on Twitter at Sal_Licata. Sal, really appreciate a few minutes and Happy New Year.
Thanks, guys. Happy New Year, Emmanuel and Jimmy. I appreciate you having me on. Good luck with the show.